stand for in that sense. So these two problems are essentially flip sides of the same coin, but they come from the same sense of hatred and prejudice and discrimination and bigotry, and certainly that underlies their political and philosophical worldview. Look, that view has flourished in the far right in particular to an extent in recent times, and it's been able to do that partly because of the wider social and economic factors that we might all look at. But of course, there has been a failure and a lack of desire and inability and inertia of the political class to also directly confront Islamism and to be willing and wanting to challenge it and directly go for it. And unfortunately, as a result of that, to some extent, the proponents of the anti-Islamist cause who come at it from the far right have been able to mainstream their arguments and their side of the debate in a way that is quite unpalatable and that is quite problematic, and it requires and it deserves our attention and our concern, and I think this event is largely a manifestation of that. To my mind, at least, the overriding philosophical sort of, I suppose, maxim of what is happening with these sort of organizations is the idea that my enemy's enemy is my friend. And they've been able to utilize that in order to move their side of the debate much further than we could really ever expect to. And to say this is not to go into the terrain of Saeed Awasi's recent comments and her dinner party test, which I reject and which I disagree with. But I think, ultimately, where she's coming from is sort of misunderstanding this problem. There is an issue here which is broader than what is happening in this country. Just as Islamism operates and feeds off a wider international climate, and it's bouncing off that and responding to that, so too is the far right. You saw the debate, no one in this room will have missed it, that surrounded the so-called Ground Zero Mosque in America, which is neither at Ground Zero nor is it a mosque, but through the sort of propagation by far right people there, Robert Spencer, Pamela Geller, this debate was mainstreamed in a quite remarkable and disturbing way, to the point where people like Newt Gingrich are saying no mosque at Ground Zero until there are churches or synagogues in Saudi Arabia. To what standard does that hold American Muslim citizens in his own backyard? To what extent does he want to hold America to comparable moral standards as Saudi? This is not the way for the debate to proceed. So I think, in that sense, that's all I really wanted to say, that this is a domestic problem. It has a large international component, has a component that needs to be tackled, and ultimately it needs to be seen as being a different manifestation of the same problem coming from the same basis. And in that sense, we need to tackle this collectively on the basis of shared values and tackle it on that basis, because ultimately what is it that we're fighting for? What is it that we're looking to protect and preserve? And none of these people, whether they come from the Islamist tradition or the far-right tradition, would share that with any of us.
Thank you. A couple of things, very, very briefly, in the 2 minutes I have. The first is this. In the some of the comments came... let me just flag up a couple of things. It will not be possible to defeat Islamist extremism whilst denigrating, for instance, people in this country who are concerned about immigration. It's not possible, because a very, very large proportion of people in this country are concerned about immigration. It tends to be the number one, or if not number one, two issue in polling in this country. So, as it were, those people who just say, people who talk about immigration all the time, those people aren't beyond the pale. They might be perfectly decent. They are, in most cases, perfectly decent people who are concerned about an issue. And I don't think it should be glibly dismissed any more than people who are concerned about demographics. There are people who have serious concerns about demographics because they're seriously concerned that the society they were born into is changing beyond recognition. That doesn't mean they should be dismissed as whack-job kooks or racists. They might have a perfectly legitimate point. I think they do. The second thing, it was demonstrated by one of the people who said, this gentleman there, talked about, going to the protest of the Pope rally. If I may say so, this, I wasn't there, I didn't approve of the protest because there were various things around that I think are complete guff. One of them is the fact that people love saying they went to the protest of the Pope thing. The Pope, the sort of, Pope's not on board with gay marriage. I'm a gay man, I'd love to have gay marriage approved by the Catholic Church. But, they're not going to. Meantime, I really, really wish that people would reserve their ire for the people who don't just want to stop me marrying, but want to throw me off a cliff. much better way to spend your time. But of course people love it because they think, oh, I'll attack the Islamists, but then to be allow myself to do that, I can attack the Pope to show I'm not a racist. Show me a Monsignor, grab me a Cardinal, and I can attack them because that will allow me. This is left-wing nonsense. Again, paedophile priests, you said. You know, if you'd have just stood there and said, you know, I mean, I'm trying to protect Muslims from paedophile imams, people would go, oh, how Islamophobic. And actually, in that case, it probably would be. But you say paedophile priests and smear the Catholic priesthood, and it's not a problem. Thirdly, finally, getting toward the end, a lot of this problem comes down, and the question we didn't get onto tonight, the fact is this. At the end of the Second World War, the Nazi leaders were tried and executed. At the end of the Cold War, it didn't happen. One of the biggest problems we have is the fact that it wasn't resolved. The people who did the largest massacres, the largest number of deaths caused by any movement in history, were not brought to trial. It's thought of as Guardian, the leading left-wing newspaper, had Richard Gott, one of its editors, a paid member of the KGB, a paid KGB agent who said, oh, it was just a bit of a laugh. Oh, and it still is just a bit of a laugh. Because if it's communism, it's a bit of a laugh. 70 million dead here and there, a bit of a laugh. And so on. So please, let's adjust our fucking values. And finally, a lot of this is a simple mental breakdown of the left. I hesitate to say this in the presence of Nick Cohen, who's chronicled this better than anyone. But the mental breakdown of the left, the fact that at so-called left-wing meetings, we have the obsessions with Palestine, for instance. There was one recently, again, I saw, Gays for Palestine. Give me a break. If Gays for Palestine were in Palestine, they'd have to move to Israel. Just don't fall for this rubbish. And don't fall for it when it's coming from the right or the far right. And don't fall for it when it's coming from the left or the far left. Have some decency.
I do want to talk about the pro-Islamist left because I do think it's very important, though there's so many issues that are going to remain unanswered. But anyway, I think with the pro-Islamist left, the problem primarily is that they also see my enemy's enemy as my friend, and because they perceive the Islamic movement to be anti-imperialist, they defend it irrespective of what these movements and states do. And in a sense, it's sort of if you look at it, it's sort of an old anti-colonial movement. It sides with the colonies no matter what happens, and it's a sort of patronizing Eurocentric view of the colonies, and it's usually siding with the ruling elite of those colonies. So it doesn't matter how many people are massacred by Ahmadinejad, they'll defend Ahmadinejad and the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I've got personal experience with this in the Stop the War Coalition. When the Twin Towers happened, the bombing, we went to the Stop the War Coalition meetings, and one of the arguments we had is you've got to condemn Islamic terrorism. They refused to do it. And we've had actually our activists who've got banners of against human rights violations in Iran, their banners grabbed off them and thrown out of the protest, whereas you've got banners of the Islamic Republic of Iran's flag, we are all Hezbollah, we are all Hezbollah. You've got lesbian women carrying that banner, and you're like, you wouldn't be alive under Hezbollah's rule, And, at one protest, I stopped going to them because every woman veiled in respect for Muslim women. Well, a lot of women under Islamic laws are fighting tooth and nail not to be veiled. They're having acid thrown in their faces and they're resisting. And you're telling us in London to veil in solidarity with the Palestinian women or the Iraqi women. There are a lot of these sorts of examples. United Against Fascism, we had a rally against Sharia law in front of Downing Street. Al-Muhajirun did a counter-demonstration against us. United Against Fascism led a rally against the EDL, who had also come for a counter-demonstration, and joined Al-Muhajirun. Come on! How can you be anti-fascist and join the Islamic fascists? Their response, there's no such thing as Islamic fascism, and that's the problem. The problem is that they don't see the fact that there are women, there are gays, there are atheists, free thinkers, socialists, left, right, human beings who are being smashed by this movement. and who are struggling and resisting it day in and day out, and they're siding with the oppressor. They're siding with the oppressor. So I think, especially as I'm on the left, I feel such a betrayal from this movement. And you know, that they're siding with Islamism, they're taking Islamic side at our expense, at the expense of people's rights. I just want to say one thing, though, that we're not talking about people, and that's where I think there's some dishonesty going on in these debates, because we're not talking about your neighbor who's anti-immigrant. As the head of the One Law for All campaign that has gathered, you know, 27,000 supporters in a very short time, and that has been challenging the Islamic movement day in and day out, I have a responsibility to target and bring light to and expose not just Islamism, but also the far right that is hijacking that issue in order to attack Muslims, other citizens in this country. A movement that doesn't give a damn about the stoning of Sakina Mohammadi Ashtiani. That Muslim bitch deserves to die. Those are the sorts of emails you get from them. Okay, so I have a responsibility. I'm not talking about individuals. Your neighbor might be anti-immigrant. I don't care. But when you have a movement that is organizing people, bringing football hooligans into the street, I have a right to attack them and condemn them. That is my job as an activist. And just as they have a right to speak, I have a right to speak. And I won't stop speaking about this. I think it's important. We have to distinguish who our enemies are, because we will not win if you have the far right taking over the debate. The governments refuse to decide this. The vast majority of people are anti-Islam, but they're not racist. They have to see a non-racist, anti-racist alternative to fighting Islamism, and we are that alternative. And that's why I think it's important. This seminar is one of many seminars, conferences, rallies we've had, but this issue is one that we've been grappling with and felt we needed to focus on this. So maybe you think we're not dealing with all the issues, but the reason for this is because this needs to be discussed and addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, hello. I'm conscious of the fact that there's very little time left for me, and almost everything I wanted to say has already been said by Maryam. I just wanted to draw attention to a couple of things. One is that it's not just the betrayal from the traditional left that we're talking about, but as an earlier speaker referred to the whole Mozambique fallout, we also have the human rights lobby, which is completely confused about where it should stand on this issue, and this is a really big problem. I mean, we have been dogged by the betrayal of the left from the moment that South All Black Sisters came into being in 1979, because if every time we tried to raise issues around domestic violence, we were told that this is not the right time by our brothers on the left. So it is never, every time you want to expose the underbellies of our communities, we are told that this is not the right time to do it. And although in the 30 years the situation has changed because there have been different players, and one might argue that I think in contradiction perhaps to one of the earlier speakers that maybe it was from the floor, that actually I would argue that things are worse, that the war on terror that the state has embarked on and the continuing draconian immigration legislation has meant that actually we are in a much worse situation, more racist situation than before. And so that does allow the left to hide behind that and not to take on and challenge the alliances that they form with various extreme right Muslim fundamentalist organizations. And we saw that last year in Tower Hamlets, when there was an attempt, when there was a venue in Tower Hamlets that was organizing a conference where extremist Islamic speakers were going to be present. The EDL decided to hold a demonstration against that. When the council actually wrote to the venue to say that the conference should be cancelled, which they did, the EDL demo was also cancelled. What happened at the march that was organized by the Left Alliance, there were calls saying that the council was craven for having banned the conference. So this is the problem, that you are not able to tackle Islamism within, not Islamism, but fascism within your own alliances, and you're fighting fascism outside, and it can't be done. Both things need to be challenged. We need to have a sort of Janus-headed position on this, fighting fascism across black, brown, and white fascism. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Look, I'm